Welcome to the System Simplified podcast, where we feature top leaders who share stories on how to successfully systemize a business. Now, let's get started with the show.
Hello, Adi Klevit here with the System Simplified podcast, where we interview top entrepreneurs, founders, and thought leaders about systematizing a business. And this podcast is being brought to you by Business Success Consulting Group. At Business Success Consulting Group, we create custom processes and tailor-made business systems so businesses can thrive and grow. And today's guest is Cindy Free. Hi, Cindy.
Hi.
I am so happy to have you on this podcast. So, Cindy, you are the CEO of HR Annie, which is an HR consulting firm, but you do so much as part of it, and we're going to discuss that. You're located in Portland, Oregon, and you have a very successful HR consulting firm that you're heading. And you do recruitment, you help with HR, training, anything else that is in the HR area, and including legal compliance, etc.
Yep.
And we're going to talk about HR processes and the importance of doing it. But first, I'd like to start with you, your background, and how did you end up with HR Annie, being the CEO of HR Annie? You have a great story. So let's start with that.
Yeah, it's kind of a fun story. I always joke around. I say, I think I started in HR when I was about 8 years old, because my mom, who's Annie, who founded our company, was the VP of HR for Mount Bachelor Ski Resort over in Central Oregon. And so, of course, having a mom that worked at a ski resort, that was weekends and holidays and all the days when maybe I was not occupied with school. And so we would drive up to the mountain and she would go to work and I would go out and ski or do whatever. And then if I was bored and, bugging her too much, she would put me to work and I would go and help in the daycare or help with the, bussing tables or making sandwiches or whatever it was that a young, child of a family-owned resort would do. So I heard a lot of different kinds of HR stories growing up, but so the apple didn't fall too far from the tree. But my career after college, I dove into more focused HR and did HR and training for different organizations. And then Annie, kind of along that way, had her own consulting company in Bend after she left Mount Bachelor, and then ultimately moved over to Portland to retire. And she lasted about 3 weeks in retirement and decided to start a consulting company here in Portland. And that was going to be her little retirement job. She was 63 years old and wanted to have 2 or 3 little clients that would kind of pay her bills and build her little, retirement plan for her to live off of. And I joined her in 2012. And we decided together that she could retire at the pace that she wanted, and I would grow the business. And so by 2016, we had officially changed the ownership, which essentially meant that I took on all the liability, yay, and she could continue to focus on her succession plan of ultimately retiring, which she ended up doing in 2020. So It's been a couple of years, and she's still an amazing mentor, and we talk a lot about the business and HR, but she's officially retired. And in between that time of 2012 and today, we now have about 14 employees.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah.
Amazing. And what a great story of actually having the courage of start a company at the age of 63 and be so successful, and seeing the company grow and expand, and working with, mother and daughter working together, which is amazing. It's just great.
Yeah, it is. And she, she still gets to be, have a bird's eye view into the business, and she's super proud of our team. But she does not want to be doing HR anymore. So she says, you all go do it. And so, everybody that works for us now are just really passionate about HR. That we're flexible, we're adaptable, we're moldable. We tailor our services to our clients. So we're not one size fits all HR consulting company. We really become an extension of our client. And we all know what joy is. And that's one of our core values, is to know what joy is and to be able to enjoy the work that we're doing and the people that we're working with.
Absolutely. And, and I met with your team, with your leadership team, and you're all so competent, but also so friendly and so nice to work with. So that's definitely, I can see how that is a core value, because you all live that. So which is incredible to see.
Yeah. It makes going to work easier.
Absolutely. Yes. Yeah. Especially when you spend so much time of your time at work, for sure. So let's dive into the HR processes. But, even before we do that, I'd like to give a big shout out to Bob Paskins, who actually introduced us. And he said, yeah, you need to meet Cindy. And he was right. So thank you, Bob, for that. And I also recorded a podcast with Bob, which was fantastic, where he went over his sales process. He's a sales consultant, help businesses with sales. And he is super competent, super professional, and knows sales in and out. So definitely thank you, Bob.
Yes, he's wonderful.
For sure. All right. So HR, and why do we need to have specific system for HR? Why not just have it free for all and people can just do whatever they want to do with HR?
Right. Because it could get you in trouble, and it also doesn't promote necessarily a culture where people are going to feel great. And so, when we approach HR in terms of building out systems for people, which is essentially what we're doing when we support them, we'll support them with whatever it is that they need. They may come to us because they need to hire someone. They may come to us because they have a more urgent employee relations situation going on, or they may come to us because they need a policy or a template or a starting point for something that maybe they want to build out on their own. So it could be a variety of reasons why we sort of enter and engage into that working relationship. And an ideal place to start with a client is when somebody comes to us and just says, I know that I need HR. I just don't know what that really means or what that looks like.
Right.
And so we'll meet with them and do an HR analysis. And essentially what that analysis consists of is going through all of the different elements that fall under the employee life cycle that have to do with HR. And so when we go through that analysis, we're looking at the legal and compliant factors, because there's a lot of employment laws and there's a lot of employee rights. And as anyone that owns a business or is a manager of a team or of a division of a company knows that the pendulum swings back and forth quite a bit in terms of being a little more favorable to the employer or a little more favorable to the employee. And a lot of times that legal and compliance stuff is the things that keeps people up at night.
Right.
And they wake up going, oh my gosh, am I doing the right thing? Plus, there's different legal and compliance criteria for the size of a company or the industry of a company or how many employees a company has. So there's just a lot of stuff to keep track of. And our team helps people look around the next quarter and look forward and keep our clients apprised. We're not attorneys. We work with a lot of really amazing attorneys and we know a lot, but we can get people pretty far in that legal and compliance area. And then the next area we're looking at is the industry best practices. And because our company has grown really quickly over the last 12 years, and we have a lot of people on our team with a variety of industry background, and then we have a lot of clients, we learn a lot about industries from our clients. I could just talk all day about plastic injection molding, for example, even though I do HR. But we learn a lot about our clients' industries, but we also have some HR kind of proprietary information where we can do market analysis for compensation, or we know what other people are offering in terms of benefits or perks or things for their employees to try to keep people competitive in their industry. And then making sure that we're tailoring HR processes or recommendations for that industry. And then the third bucket that we analyze in that process is culture. And so for us, knock on wood, we're 12 years old. We just get to work with clients that are really trying to take good care of their employees. And if they don't know something, they don't know it. And that's why we're there to help them do an even better job of that. So how do they want people to feel about their work? How do they know that their employees feel a sense of belonging in the organization they're working at? What are things that we can do to make sure they're taking the best care of their team as possible? And so when we go through that HR analysis, we kind of go through all of those different elements from the employee life cycle, from the time they're hired or they're thinking about hiring somebody, to the onboarding, to training, to the employee experience, which could be their benefits, safety, employee relations, training and development, manager training. We're asking them about all of that employee experience stuff. And then, of course, the separation process, which inevitably, people leave, good or bad. Ultimately, they may not retire from the organization, or they may. So we really go through that entire employee life cycle. And then we can create a HR infrastructure for the client. And we can go through, we can ensure that each element of that HR infrastructure has its own system. It has its own standard operating procedures or workflows or whatever we want to call it, whatever they feel like most comfortable calling it. We can build those systems out for them. And then we adapt to the client as well in terms of how much technology do they want to bring in to their HR infrastructure? Or are they still not quite there yet, but they want everything to be still paper, or, they have logistically, they can hand things out to employees, or are they multi-location and they need things more digitized so they can reach people efficiently?
That's incredible. Cindy, as you were talking, I was thinking, okay, this is really the answer of why we need systems in HR. This podcast is all about systems. I always talk about systems, but HR is really the backbone of the company, because your company is not going to exist without people. And if you don't take good care of people, they're going to leave. They're not going to be there. They're not going to be able to be as productive. And I think a lot of times, from my experience, when I talk to business owners, they go, oh yeah, HR is like compliance. It's something I have to do so I don't get in trouble. Or it's something that, there are so many laws and legalities and all that. And as you mentioned, compliance is definitely super important, but it's only one aspect. You have the aspect of the employee life cycle, just like you have a customer or a client life cycle. It's kind of like, what is the employee experience when they're working with you, right? They're working in your company. From beginning to end, it has to be a seamless, beautiful experience. And hopefully the end will be not, as you said, people do leave, but hopefully they will stay. When I say beginning to end, meaning the continuation of the employment, right? So you have to have that positive experience so everyone grows in that process. And then you, of course, have the culture as well that goes in it with it, because you have to have a good culture, a culture that really reflects who you are, so you can attract people that are like you. So I think you just put it together in a very excellent terms that is very easy to understand why. And then you have to have a process and a system for each one of those components in order to execute it. And I know that that's what you help clients with. But let's talk about, our listeners are listening right now and they're asking themselves, okay, so what are some of the systems that I can implement? And, one of the things that I'm curious about, so let's talk about the compliance. So making sure that, that you're in compliance, that you stay out of trouble, that, you protect yourself as an employer, and you also give a good experience to the employee. What are some of your best practices that you recommend to your clients that they keep, keep everything in writing or keep a file? Like, what would be some of those tips that we can give our listeners?
Yeah. A good starting point for HR is, one of the starting points for HR is there is a whole administrative side to HR. So the bare minimum, you hire someone, there's some paperwork they need to do. That paperwork needs to go somewhere. And then during that employee life cycle, there's things that happen. They go through training, or they have a little performance issue that you're taking some notes about, or maybe even formalizing it into a performance improvement plan or something like that. There's other kinds of paperwork with training or benefits paperwork, or, there's a lot of information that's collected about employees, and HR is usually the one that's administering most or portions of that. And so building out a system to be able to maintain employee information is super important. That could be personnel files is the system, and those personnel files can be maintained in paper documents, or it can be maintained on some kind of a digital platform, which is amazing because now there's so much technology that can help support HR that oftentimes you could have a platform where you're doing payroll, you're able to send and receive documents for employees through that system. You're able to send out reminders or additional documents along the way to get from employees or for managers to access. So those kinds of, that admin side of HR systems is really important. And the sooner that somebody can make that pivot to digital, because there's so much out there now, the better.
Right. So Cindy, on that point, it can be an employee, like you can have a system like Bamboo HR as an example, or Namely. So you can have a system like that, but you can also have whatever system you decide, it depends on the size of the company, right?
Yeah. I mean, a lot of people like to have digital system of some sort. And what we would recommend is, even if you're not investing in some kind of a platform yet, or you just don't want to, if you're putting things into folders, make sure that system that you're using, maybe it's Dropbox or Google Drive or Box or SharePoint or something like that, make sure that that system is secure, because you're saving a lot of confidential employee information in those systems. So make sure that the information is secure, and especially if your industry requires something like HIPAA compliance or things like that, of course, you want to make sure you're doubly secure. So sometimes people like to go with those more formal platforms because it includes elements of additional security. But saving things on like your desktop or in your email or that kind of thing is not great. The other thing is, when you have multiple people collecting information from employees, you want to make sure that everybody understands that you need one central place for all of that employee information to live. So if managers are doing performance communication and they're just saving things on their computer, that actually needs to get pushed to their employee file. So those administrative systems are really, really important for all of those three reasons. They're important because there's legal and compliance elements to it. It's important because there's industry best practice elements to it. And it's important because people want to know that their information is stored safely and securely and confidentially, which helps your culture.
For sure. Good. So we have that part in terms, that's a great tip in terms of like, keep the documentation organized and in a good place, and that can be easily accessible and secure. Any other best practices of what to document, when to document?
Yeah, documentation is super important. So outside of just the required paperwork and things like that you're grabbing from employees as part of compliance, performance is probably the other area where there's a lot of documentation that needs to occur. And it's also really important when people are documenting that there's a system for how that documentation goes throughout the company. So probably the most important thing is ensuring that whoever is in charge of documentation, which typically is managers, they understand what they should and shouldn't document and how to document and what to say in the documentation, which for the most part is limited to facts. So if it's a performance issue, or if it's a worker, a safety or an accident or an injury, or if it's a customer complaint, or if it's just an employee sharing a concern or a complaint about the workplace, when we document, we want to make sure that we're initially documenting the facts, because it is easy to get our emotions involved in documentation and say, I think they're just having a bad day, or I heard last week this thing happened, or this person's always complaining, or whatever it might be. And it seems obvious that we wouldn't put those things in documentation, but we'd be surprised how sometimes our judgments or our biases sort of accidentally push into documentation. So really documenting the facts, whatever those scenarios are, what happened, who did it happen to, when did it happen, were there any witnesses, what was the nature of it? And then if somebody has a gut feeling or an opinion, they might consider saying, I heard this, or this could be lending to the situation or whatever. But even if you're documenting an opinion, just document that it's your opinion.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Great advice. Okay. So we have a system, and then we have the actual doingness of the actual documentation and how to document that. So that is one aspect. I just wanted to touch on one aspect of the whole HR. We have a whole system. What do you think, from your experience in working with so many businesses, when businesses do not have, let's say they're growing successfully, they're scaling, but the HR part is lacking. From your experience, why is it? Like, why there is not enough attention on HR?
We work with a lot of people that are small to mid-sized companies, and we have kind of a particular niche of clients that are growing very quickly. And one of the reasons I think sometimes HR gets sort of bypassed is because when somebody's growing so quickly, there's a lot of other competing, urgent, and important priorities. And HR is one area where you can do the bare minimum. And as long as you're doing the bare minimum and you're in compliance, then you're good. However, not having processes for best practices or employee retention or employee happiness or engagement will just continue to lead to, people quitting or employee relations issues or those other kinds of things. HR is one of those areas, though, where it's hard to quantify the impact of HR sometimes. So there are certain areas where it makes a lot of sense. You can quantify how many people you've hired and how long it took you to hire them and how long they stayed. And so strategically, that information is important. And then that might motivate an employer to say, oh, gosh, our turnover is really high. Our retention rate is really low. Let's put some time and energy into our hiring process. But it's easy to kind of cherry pick different areas of HR to focus on instead of focusing on it holistically. And it's easy to have things come up and then be reactive to them,
right,
instead of proactive. And so what I've seen with companies that are growing quickly or scaling or whatever is that a couple of things. One is sometimes the person that started doing the HR in the company did a really good job when the company was smaller, but their experience or their skill set isn't keeping up with where the company's going now. And it's unfortunate. So we either have to come in and help train that person and get them up to speed, or bring additional support into the organization, or we take on elements of that kind of higher level HR support or project management. Or sometimes they have to make the tough decision that they need somebody to come in that has now worked with the level of the organization that's going to be existing, in the next 3 to 5 years, that's already seen what's around the next corner in an organization that's going through that kind of growth like they are. So, and just, get somebody in there that's been there and done that and can hit the ground running in that new way that the organization operates. The other reason is because just historically, HR wasn't necessarily seen as someone who had a seat at the leadership table. So HR personnel people were seen more as a administrative or support role in an organization, and not so much as a strategic part of the team. And so much of HR, if we can look at it strategically, we can build out an infrastructure that can sustain the organization where they're headed. But whoever is in that leadership capacity has to be able to see that HR can be a strategic business partner with them as well. And that's where we start talking about bigger processes like a hiring process or a compensation structure, which sometimes falls under the CFO. But the CFO could put a compensation structure together, but the HR team needs to know, do employees understand why they're being paid what they're being paid? Do they understand what total compensation is? How do our benefits or our PTO or our perks or other kind of compensable factors fit into our total compensation structure?
100%.
Yeah.
That is, you just gave the exact reasons why organizations or companies will not grow beyond the point that they actually have somebody managing their people, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, your people are your asset. Those are resources. If you look at human resources, right?
Yeah.
Those are your resources that without investing in those resources, you're not going to expand. So investing in HR should be as commensurate with investing in technology, if not even more, right? Or in a strategy on how to improve your marketing or your sales. But doing the HR part, and you said it so well in terms of like, for companies that do not have a seat at the table, at the leadership table, the leadership team for HR, they're not going to be as successful because it takes an effort of everyone in the organization to make the organization grow. And those are excellent points. So hopefully our listeners that are listening to us, and I'm also going to write a blog post based on it, they will identify themselves maybe in one of those categories. And I would say, and I'm sure you will agree with, is that, don't wait to a point of panic or pain to hire an HR specialist or an HR consultant, don't wait to reach out. Right. It's the time to, or even if you don't, if you want to do it internally, have HR systems. Do not wait and say, okay, this is last. I mean, actually creating the correct hiring, onboarding, training, but also everything else that goes around it in terms of like your culture, your compensation, the strategy, how you're going to grow, how you're going to retain, the strategy for retention. Don't wait until it's too late. Don't wait until people are quitting, because at that time you're actually losing. If the employees you wanted to keep are actually quitting, then you're actually losing those people. Yeah. Take proactive actions ahead of time, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And, there's a lot of people that do wait until there's some urgent thing happening or some really escalated situation, and they'll call us and we can get them through it. And then we usually will take a step back and say, how are all these other things looking in your organization? Was there maybe something that we could have recommended or we can recommend to prevent it from happening in the future? So we're not always just sort of helping people that are broken down on the side of the road. We're actually doing the preventative stuff ahead of time, which is an ideal situation. And sometimes what people just need, kind of back to the front of the conversation, what people just need is to go through this HR analysis with us, because if we never end up working together for whatever reason, at least we've gone through the process of having that conversation and providing them with that recommended roadmap or recommended infrastructure. And so they know what they need. Absolutely. They know what they need. And that, just knowing what they need, is peace of mind. And then if and when the time is right for them to bring us in or maybe hire someone internally, they at least have sort of a tool where we can start chipping away at stuff or project managing things out with their current internal team if they have that capacity. So, like I said at the beginning, we just want to help people with HR. It's as simple as that, whatever that might mean. And because we do, HR can encompass hiring, we have a whole team of recruiters. Because it can encompass training or rolling out processes to managers or leaders or bringing people together, we do a lot of training. And then because sometimes people just need a quick question answered, or they need a whole infrastructure built out with lots of support, we have a team of consultants, so we're just happy to help wherever we can.
Fantastic. Yeah. And you gave us a great information that, definitely convinced me the importance of HR and having the correct systems. And I love the idea of having a map, that mapping the process or the strategy of like, what do you need? Like, okay, you want an ideal HR department. This is what it will take. This is where you're at right now. This is current state. This is future state. Here are the steps to take. And then it's kind of like, okay, what are the first steps you're going to take? Just like when I start documenting processes and procedures, I always ask what area, if you had well-documented processes and procedures, will get you the biggest return on investment. And the same thing from what you're saying.
Yeah.
You can have a whole audit of your HR, and then you sit down and go, okay, where do we start, right? What area, if you had a good organized HR system, will actually prevent something or will give you bigger return, or where should we start? And it doesn't have to be an overwhelming thing. It can be bite-sized pieces that you can start there.
Absolutely. And even with all the compliance and legal and laws and things like that for employers, we of course want our employers to be in compliance, and we don't want them to have unnecessary liability. And at the same time, sometimes in terms of our recommendations, we might prioritize another part of HR processes or infrastructure that is not necessarily compliance, but it's a really good best practice, and it might help them avoid some kind of liability down the road. So we just weigh, we also understand how to weigh the risk within our recommendations.
Absolutely. Well, Cindy, if they want to get a hold of you, because right now people are going, okay, I want to call Cindy. How should I get a hold of you and the team?
Yeah, you can go on our website. Our website provides a lot of really good information about our company, our services, our team, our commitment to diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, some of our clients, some testimonials. So I think our website is a really good resource, and that's hrannieconsulting.com. Or email me just directly to Cindy at hrannieconsulting.com, and we'll connect.
Beautiful. And Annie is Annie.
Yeah.
I mean, sometimes people spell it a little bit.
Yes.
So that's the right spelling. So hrannieconsulting.com. Definitely check it out. And Cindy, thank you so much for being a guest on this podcast. This was great. You provided such wealth of information. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening to the System Simplified podcast. We'll see you again next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes.